Thank you for being with me. Genesis chapter 11, Bible book survey. Hope you're enjoying this. We're going to an interesting chapter. A lot of kind of a sort of genealogy kind of a moment, but there's another big moment that happens in chapter 11. And I think you're going to like the clue. It's going to help you to remember the topic really well, I think. So let's just jump into this thing real quickly. Human timeline. I know I make too much of this and review it every time, but I think it's very important for you to see this. What's going to happen is we're going to see an event that's going to take place just after the flood here somewhere. And but I want you to again notice that Genesis is covering over a third of the human timeline. This is us over here. This is creation down here. And so it's just a marvelous book. We're going to go all the way through Abraham. That's what the tent represents. And almost to Moses. We're going to get up to the death of Joseph. And so a lot of stuff there. Hi, Debbie. Thanks for joining me. Happy Lord's Day to you as well. So a third of the human timeline covered by the book of Genesis. Here are your 10 questions. And for those of you who don't know it, Gabriel comes up with the questions for this particular class. And I think he does a pretty good job of it. But here are the references and things. He also takes care of the picture clues, as most of you know. Really proud of him. He does a good job with his artwork and helping me in this ministry. All right, here is the text. No, it's not the text. What comes next? It's the review, isn't it? Creation chapter 1. Chapter 2, you got two creation numbers here, right? 1 and 1 equals 2 because we're retelling the creation story, but we're going to emphasize humanity, or the fact that man and woman were created. Chapter 3, the serpent, the fall of man. 4, Cain and Abel. 5, we've got from Adam, tree of the knowledge of good and evil, to Noah, the big boat, the rainbow, etc. So that's that's going to be the genealogy chapter. And then in chapter 6, we're going to get the command from heaven, thus the word bubble. Command from heaven, build the boat. In chapter, what was that? That's 6. In chapter 7, we're going to see if the flood actually comes. And so I like the lightning bolt there. The flood comes upon the earth. Chapter 8, the flood's going to subside. And remember, we got the raven and then the dove that is sent out. The dove eventually is going to come back with the branch in its mouth. And then in chapter 9, we've got God, Noah, and the rest of the world, by the way. But we're going to emphasize Noah here, and got the rainbow happening there. Chapter 10, Noah's descendants are going to spread out. We saw that last time. And then when you get to chapter 11, again, I think this is a pretty good one. The Tower of Babel probably didn't look like that. As research and all that kind of thing, it probably was more something like you would see. Was the Incas that had these mounds that kind of built up? It might have been something like that. We don't really know. But I really like what Gabriel did here because he puts the two kind of parallel towers together as if they're going to join at the end or whatever. And that helps you to remember chapter 11. I thought that was an excellent clue. Hi, Mom, Dad, thanks for watching. So chapter 11, we're going to deal with the Tower of Babel. The word Babel is clearly going to play an important role as we get into this particular chapter with regards to babbling. Okay, they babble on, that kind of thing. You'll see that here in just a second. So that's chapter 11. In chapter 11, again, you got the topic and you got the description over here. But when you come down here to get the memorization part of our study together, Gabriel chose verse 4, and I thought he did a good job here as well. Remember how you do this. Repeat the line 5 times and then go back, erase keywords, etc. If you do this, it'll get it into your mind. Those of you who are part of the School of Biblical Studies, you'll notice it in some of our reading assignments. So what we try to do is that the first question in each lesson, the first question in each lesson is for you to take a passage and write it down. Well, what that means is that by the time you get to the end of the quarter, you will have written that particular memory verse 11 times. The last question form that you receive asks you to write it from memory. Memory is I've never been really good. And the older I get, see my gray hair, the older I get, the harder it gets for me. But repetition is the key to remembering. And so if you'll do this 5 times, then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city. 5 times. And a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Now, I want you to recognize, we'll see this in the text here in a moment, but I want you to notice this idea of lest we be dispersed. What was it we saw in the last chapter? Noah and his folks are dispersing, right? What was it we saw when Noah gets off the big boat and God makes a covenant with him and his sons and be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth? In that, I think, is the implication. I want you to spread out. I want you to go across the entire planet. Well, when you get to chapter 11, it seems that mankind has again gotten full of itself and decided we're going to do it our own way. What we want to do is build this center, and there's going to be a big tower reaching into the heavens, and we're going to make a name for ourselves. Okay? Notice this, make a name for ourselves. I think it's very important. We in Christianity, I've made this point in some of my lessons recently with regards to home churches. I'm not so sure about what we're guilty of, the same kind of a thing that they were guilty of back in the day, as far as building big structures and edifices to make a name for ourselves. Now, we do that all under the excuse that, well, that way the community will know where we meet, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what I'm saying? It's very similar to this kind of thing. I think we got to be careful about making a name for ourselves rather than making a name for God. And as you go back and you see what the New Testament church did, especially the life of Christ, you find a situation that was very, very simplistic rather than complicated. Jesus never owned a building. The early church never owned a building. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong to own buildings, but I am saying that when we do this for the wrong motives, and especially when we invest so much of God's money into a building that's going to sit empty for the majority of the week, we got to ask ourselves, is that really the best use of God's money? It's a beautiful day here in Northeast Arkansas, and I got the heater on, and I'm starting to sweat. So I'm going to turn that heater down as we continue on. You don't want to see me sweat, right? All right, moving into the text then. We got several frames to cover this morning. Now, the whole earth had one language and the same words. Okay. Now, that's in contrast somewhat to what we saw last time, where we noticed various the sons of Adam, as they branch out and they go various places, and they've got their own language. How does this harmonize? I don't know. But perhaps there is a kind of a one language system, but there are tribal I was going to say derelicts. That's not the word. What is the word where you have we have languages within a language? I can't call it. Somebody put it up on the screen. But they had dialects. Thank you. Dialects. They had dialects within the overall language. Perhaps that's what's being referenced here. I don't really know. But what we have is a one language system, and that one language system is going to lend itself pretty well to an arrogance. We have the same thing working today. English tends to be the world language. And although there are others that compete with it, I get that kind of it. But English tends to be the world language. And being that I was born in America, speak English, all of those kind of things, or maybe you're born in England and you speak English, you had it before I did, whatever. There can be somewhat of an arrogance that comes with that. I've never really appreciated fully what people have to go through to learn the English language. And every once in a while, I come across some really oddities within the English language, and I think to myself, man, if I had to learn this as a child, how hard would that be? Because this rule does not cover it. It's not consistent throughout, that kind of a thing. Well, anyhow, back to my point. They had the same language, and perhaps, like I say, it was an umbrella language, and within that umbrella language, there are a lot of various, whatever that word was. But they have many languages within the overall language. And as that played out, then there was an arrogance of connection. I think I'm seeing some of that playing out with regards to the internet. There seems to be somewhat of an arrogance of humanity that has come on, that we are a world power. And this whole pandemic that some of us are living through, and we're seeing that, we're addressing this from the human standpoint and what we can do instead of really relying on God. I think that was the problem in Genesis chapter 11. I don't think God cared that they spoke a common language. I don't think that was a big deal to him at all. I'm not even sure that he cared that they built a tower. What he cared about was that they were not, number one, fulfilling his command to spread out, be fruitful, multiply, et cetera, et cetera. And number two, their focus was on themselves and not on the Creator. And they can't even draw breath without the Creator filling their lungs with oxygen, but they don't even acknowledge him, et cetera. All right. So they had one language. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. So they're going to cook these bricks. And so, and by the way, A lot of folks, when they think back to this time, they think of a very ancient and very primitive people. I'm not sure you need to make that assumption at all. My father makes this point in his book, and I think it's an excellent one. Where is that book? I'll show it again. Advertised. This is one of those books that we use in school biblical studies. You can know. My dad makes his point that, they could have been a very advanced society. That makes a lot of sense. You think about it, and this is going to be it's a big part of our lesson today. They were living up to 900 years prior to the flood. And so that means that generation after generation could pass down their wisdom. You don't lose it. When grandma dies, she takes all of her, wisdom with her, and those kind of the wives' tales and all that. No, because grandma's still alive, and they could have been a very, very advanced culture prior to the flood. I personally think that they were. Well, this particular culture is still going to be benefiting by much of the wisdom that came about pre-flood. So I think the whole idea of them building a tower, Noah being able to build a big boat on which he could save the animals, I don't think that was a far stretch at all. And they said, well, let's come make these bricks and burn them through it. So they're going to be able to make this foundation and build this structure. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar, whatever that word is, for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. That's our memory verse, but it's key. So we're going to build this city, put a tower in it. Tower's going to reach into the heavens for the purpose of making a name for ourselves, two things, and not dispersing. Two things that God was not happy with. Number one, I'm not interested in you making a name for yourself. I'm interested in you and looking to me. I'm your father, and I want to take you by your little pumpkin hand, and I want us to walk through life together, and you're not doing that. Number two, it's not just that they were making a name for themselves, but they were not dispersing. I want to cover the planet with the glory that I have placed within my creation who are made in my image, and they're not doing that, okay? And so the very motive of what's taking place at the Tower of Babel was skewed, and God's not pleased with it. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. So he's going to view it himself. He's going to look at what's happening, and he's going to have, obviously concerns about it. And the Lord said, behold, they are, who's he talking to, by the way? I suppose you could conclude that he's talking to the angels, whatever. But, if you go back to chapter 1, where God says, let us make man in our image, the plurality there, who's he talking to? Evidently, he's talking to the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. But anyhow, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which built, and the Lord said, behold, they are one people. They're united. They're speaking the same words. They're one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. That's the truth. And nothing that they purpose to do will now be impossible for them. Meaning that in their unity. Hi, Rajesh over there in India. Good to see you, my friend. Happy Lord's Day to you too. In their unity, as they come together, God's going to say, we're going to have, it's going to be a very similar problem to when Adam and Eve came together to rebel against God by eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What's the next thing God does? We got to separate them from the tree of life, because they'll live forever. Well, here we have mankind, again, in that same vein of rebellion against God. They're coming together in unity to make a name for themselves, or to rebel against God's command to disperse. And God says, ooh, this isn't good. We let this continue. There's nothing going to be impossible to them. And the point I think that's more important here is that God is saying it could get so far out of hand, I couldn't redeem anybody. There wouldn't be anybody left. Remember, he's got in his rearview mirror, Noah. We got down to 8 folks. I can't let that happen again. And so we're going to find this happen, and it's not long until we're going to turn the chapter and we're going to begin to see Abraham. This is where God begins the process, I think, of establishing one family that he can put most all of his focus on to get us to a point where the Messiah can come. That family is going to come from Abraham. That's why it's so very, very important, because God is seeing right here that mankind is coming together in unity to rebel against him. And if I let this thing continue without emphasizing some level of righteousness, this could get so far out of hand, there won't be anybody left to redeem. I think that's what's happening here. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people. I guess I already read that. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language. So we're going to go down there and confuse and notice it's an us. We're going to go down there and confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. So evidently it became a half-done city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because the Lord confused the languages of all the earth. And from there, the people dispersed them over the face of all the earth. Babel. I think Babel is an onomatopoeia. I always read that word just to say it. It sounds so funny. An onomatopoeia is a word that is defined by the way you say it. Babel. It's kind of like bow wow or woof woof. It in itself doesn't really have a meaning that comes without the pronunciation of it. Well, Babel is kind of like murmur. Murmur, 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 murmur. It's kind of a background noise. They babbled and they babbled on because they couldn't speak the same language anymore. I just like for you to take for a moment and go back in your imagination and consider what that would have been like, that moment. You know, maybe Joe is handing a brick to Jimmy, and all of a sudden Joe says to Jimmy, "Hey, how big you want this brick?" And Jimmy says, "What did you say?" In a different language, because all of a sudden, boom, they're speaking separate languages. You can see how it just throw everything into chaos. And now, how are we going to build this thing? I don't even know what you're saying to me, etc. Perhaps you've been in situations where you've tried to communicate with somebody who's speaking a different language, and you've noticed all the barriers that are there. We take language for granted, do we not? It's just so easy, all the nuances and the various things that me and my boys and my wife, we understand each other and all those kind of, but then you get into a situation, it doesn't even have to be necessarily a different language. It could be, you travel to a different part of the country and they just have different kind of expressions. And it's like, the confusion that comes? Well, imagine what happened at the Tower of Babel when all of a sudden they can't speak each other's language. Truly a babbling on kind of a scenario that takes place there. All right, I got to get a drink. As we do that, though, I'm going to show you what comes next. When you get into verse 10, we're going to discuss the generations of the sons of Noah again. But we're going to put an emphasis, and you'll notice in red, I'm going to put an emphasis on the number of years these guys lived after they had their sons and whatever. These are the generations of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he fathered Arpachshad. 2 years after the flood. So this Arpachshad, whatever his name is, he comes 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he fathered Arpachshad 500 years and other sons. And so you have to add up his, all of the years of Shem's life. But what I'm wanting you to see is they're going to be consistent. Each of these is going to talk about after they had their children. How much more did they live? And the thing that's interesting to me is I want you to notice that the way it decreases, it's going to come down in number. I told you earlier on the canopy theory, this idea that the water around the earth formed such a ball that it blocked out the ultraviolet rays from the sun and thus allowed mankind to live longer. Well, if you remove that, and we did at the flood, because remember the water comes from the top and from the bottom, if you remove that, then all of a sudden we're going to have the ultraviolet rays of the sun getting through, and we're going to see aging take place. Well, it seems pretty apparent to me that as you see the generations play out here, that you see aging is going to happen. Remember, pre-flood, they're living up to over 900 years. Well, now we're down to, I don't know, you have to go back and get the original as far as Shem is concerned and add to these 500 years after he gives birth to this, or his wife did, Arpachshad, whatever his name is. All right, but when you go into verse 12, then notice Arpachshad, he's the dude who got born here. He's going to live 35 years and father Shelah. And Arpachshad lived after he fathered Shelah 430 years. So 403 years. So you can do this math, 403, 35, what is that? That's 438 years. So 438 years compared to the fact that pre-flood, they were living 900 plus years. You can see, boom, we're starting to come down pretty rapidly and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he fathered Eber. And Shelah lived, after he fathered Eber, 403 years. So the guy's living now, what is that, 433? We had 438 up here. So that's, it's pretty close. But again, it's a lot a lot less than 900. Now, Eber, this guy, he's going to live 34 years. He's going to father Peleg. And Eber lived, after he fathered Peleg, 430 years. So this guy, now we got it going up a little bit more. So what is that? 430, that's 464 years. So he's living 30 years longer than his dad. Okay, but that's still not a big stretch, is it? You're still seeing how we're coming down as far as the length of life. When Peleg had lived 30 years, excuse me, he fathered Reu. And Peleg lived, after he fathered Reu, 209 years and had other sons and daughters. So this guy could have been an anomaly, because notice here, 200, that's 239. That's way down. He died a very, very young man compared to the rest of these guys. This guy's lived 464 years. So that's, this guy, he dies pretty young. And then you're going to notice that in the next group, Reu, he's going to live 32 years, and he's going to father Serug. And Reu lived, after he fathered Serug, 207 years. So what is that? That's 239 years. What did the other guy live? 239 years, I guess. So, but it's about the same, isn't it? That these two guys lived. Now, Serug had lived 30 years. He fathered Nahor, and Serug lived, after father Nahor, 200. So now we're down to 230. Again, very similar. But you can see we're way down below because the ball of water is broken. I'm concerned. I'm convinced. She's not concerned. It's already happened. What to be concerned about? This is broke, and so now we got aging taking place. Now, Nahor is going to live. He's an important guy. Nahor is going to live 29 years. He's going to father Terah. So who's Terah? We're going to see in just a moment. But Nahor is important because he births Terah. Terah is important because he's going to birth a really important fellow. And Nahor lived, after he fathered Terah, 119 years. And so now you can see we are again, we're descending in numbers of years, and had other sons and daughters. Here's the point, though. When Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered, who's that guy? Abram. So Abram, he's going to father Abram, Nahor, and Haran. But Abram is the guy we want to focus on. Now let's go back in your mind's eye. I got to watch my time. Let's go back in your mind's eye and remember the timeline that we have, the human timeline. And you might remember how I built that human timeline for you. What you need to do is draw you a straight line and then divide it into thirds. The first hash mark is going to be creation. That's where we start. The second, we're in thirds, right? The second hash mark is going to be a tenth. That's going to represent Abraham. That's the next major time zone, if you will. Then there's another 2,000 years, another hash mark. What's that? That's the cross. That's Jesus. Another 2,000 years, and that's us. So you got creation, Abraham, Jesus, us. If you go between creation and Abraham, halfway, you got the flood. If you go halfway between Abraham and Jesus, you got David on his throne. But I shouldn't have done that. That complicated too much. Let's just stay back here in early history. And I wish I had that up here. If I had it in my brains, I'd have used it. But maybe you're able to picture it in your head. Creation, Abraham. That's the first big 2,000-year marker in the human timeline. Halfway through, we got the flood. But the reason Abraham is so huge is because, as you know, we're going to see the covenant that is made between Abraham and God with regards to preserving the lineage that will bring the Messiah into the world, which is the next major line, which is Jesus. That's important because if you keep in context, as obviously Moses did when he wrote the book of Genesis, when you go to chapter 11, one of the major events in chapter 11 is the Tower of Babel, another major event of rebellion against God. And God comes down there and he says, look, we can't let mankind get out of hand because there won't be anybody to redeem. And I think it's at that point that the wheels start moving with regards to establishing this covenant with Abram, who will become Abraham, establishing that covenant so that we're going to focus in on one particular family, God says. Instead of focusing on all the earth because they're not getting it, I'm going to focus on this one family. And so he makes this covenant with Abraham. That doesn't mean he lost interest in the rest of us. It just means that he had to focus in on one family in order for us to keep the lineage alive that would bring Jesus. Okay? And so Abram is going to be very, very significant to our story. There's my buddy Greg up there in the Maryland Thank you for blessing my ministry. I appreciate you, Greg. Love you, man. All right, this is the last, I think this is the last frame. Now, these are the generations of Terah. Remember, Terah is going to be the father of Abram. Fathered Abram, Nahor, Haran. And Haran fathered Lot. You know the name Lot. Okay, Haran's going to die, and basically Abraham's going to raise Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldeans. Excuse me. And Abraham and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. So her name's going to get changed too. She's going to go from Sarai to Sarah. Abram's going to go from Abram to Abraham. And the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, and the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and Iscah. Now, Sarai was barren. She had no child. Now, you just have to hold on to that thought because we're not going to deal with it in this chapter. We'll deal with it eventually. But Sarah has trouble having children. Well, not just trouble. She can't have children, okay? And that's going to plague her entire life till we get Isaac. You know that story. But it's going to plague her, and she's going to be very jealous of other women who are able to have children, but she can't have children. Massive application here that I guess I don't have time to go to, but massive application, and that is you got to wait on God. Wait on God. Sometimes God's plan, not sometimes, most of the time, God's plan is not my plan. His timeline is not my time. You got to wait on God. Sarah and Abraham are going to wait their entire life practically before they get their first child. But man, what a special child he is. So, Terah took Abram, his son-in-law, and Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son, Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. So their goal is to go to the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So I'd have to go back and get it. I think I can do that. Yeah, he's 70 years when he fathered Abram, but this one just says the days of Terah were 200. It doesn't say after he had children. So it's I guess he only lived 205 years total. And so again, you see the length of life is decreasing rapidly. All right, there are your 10 questions for the School of Biblical Studies folks that we tried to answer here just the last few minutes. I think we did a pretty good job. If you're going to do the doodle, now's the time to do it. So maybe you can come up with a different Tower of Babel. Or maybe you think that the theme for chapter 11 should be something other than what we stated. If that's the case, draw you another picture. And, the point here, had a good friend of mine write in up there in Maryland. Greg, you know this guy. He wrote in, he said, hey, my wife and I are going to do these things together. Or my child and I are going to do these things together. I don't remember which one it was. Anyhow, and the idea was that, we're gonna. So is that okay? I think you were saying, am I cheating? You can't cheat in the School of Biblical Studies because, other than cheat God. The entire point of the School of Biblical Studies is not to get some kind of human degree or what. The whole point of the School of Biblical Studies is to hear well done from God. That's the only motive I've got here, is that we study together. And I don't care if you study with your grandma. If everybody's learning, God bless you. And that's kind of the same way here. I don't care if you redraw that picture. Whatever you got to do to get it in your mind, that's the point of the School of Biblical Studies. All right. I only left myself 2 minutes for prayer time. If you've got a prayer request, please get it in here and let me know. I'll give you mine. My son, Gabriel, is going to go on a mission trip to one of the western states here in a couple weeks. And is going to be working with, at least they're calling it, refugees. And some of these refugees, whatever that means, are of the Muslim faith. And I'm told that he's going to have the opportunity to engage and be a part of that. Very, very proud of my youngest son, and so thankful for him. Would you be mindful of him as he continues to raise money for various mission trips? He's got other mission trip coming up this summer with the Missionaries for America program, etc. But more importantly than raising money, would you just pray that he'll be effective and safe as he goes on this trip, and that it'll just be a life-changing trip, not just for him, but for those who need the gospel, etc. So would you pray for my boy? And there are others I'm sure that we need to be praying for. If you want to, as I journey into the sermon time, go ahead and list them there, because a lot of folks see this on Facebook or whatever it may be, and they'll see the comments and they will pray about it. We got viewers all the way to India, my buddy Rajesh. And so even Rajesh on the other side can see it practically as it's happening, and his prayers are powerful. So if you have a prayer request, put her up right now. Okay. All right. Welcome to Lord's Day Live. We're about to enter into our sermon time. Get me a little lubrication there, and we'll get after this kind of thing. So thankful. The Christian resistance, principles for governing civil disobedience. We're entering into the second half. It's not really half. We're way over half, but it's the second part. Maybe that's what I should say. The second part of this particular study. You'll see that in a second. Before I go there, I always get ahead of myself. Before I go there, I need to step aside and let you guys who are school biblical studies folks, there's your questions that we're going to answer, hopefully during this sermon period time with regards to the Christian resistance. Got those? All right. We have been talking about revival, the New Testament examples, and we've spent most of this quarter dealing with that first section, okay? But we're going to spend the last several classes of this quarter talking about survival, not just revival, but also survival, meaning the underground church. What do we do in order to survive during times of persecution? Well, the best thing to figure that out is go back to the New Testament example and do like they did. And so that's what we're going to see. God's plan for survival. See the tank coming up here facing the church building? No, I think it's a pretty vivid illustration. Not quite there yet in America, but I think that it wouldn't take much to get us there. 3 building blocks: family, fellowship, and friends. We're going to deal with family first. And so here, another graphic just to show you how this is going to play out. The most important part of this graphic is the passages of Scripture, as always, God's Word. You'll notice that when we deal with the discussion of the early church, one of the first things that folks do, and it's a good thing as far as scholars are concerned, is they're going to regularly go to the opening days of the church, and they're going to see this first little snapshot of the church that is given in Acts chapter 2, the last paragraph or so of that chapter. Remember, in Acts chapter 2, midway through, we're going to have 3,000 baptized. So we got a good-sized church going on here. But the evidence points to the fact that they didn't meet regularly all together in a group of 3,000. They might have, but I don't think that the evidence points that direction. Because it talks about them meeting within the temple compound. I think really what happened is that they had small groups that took place that eventually evolved into what is the real New Testament pattern, and that is they met in homes. Anyhow, what we're going to see in Acts chapter 2 is that we're going to see that they met in their homes. We're going to see that they came together and had all things in common. And we're going to see that there was a great deal of progress that took place as the Lord added to the church. Now, some of you who are part of the School of Biblical Studies, you're going to see in this lesson particularly that there's a lot of similarities between this and what I'm talking about in our last day's topics, how to home church, and you're right. But I wanted to make sure that I harmonize these two things because I think that this is very important to the survival. God's plan for survival as far as the church is concerned, you got to emphasize certain things, and these are those things as you see in Acts chapter 2, okay? So let's talk about this first building block for surviving as far as the church is concerned. I want to take you to 3 passages, actually 5. You'll see it in the next frame. I got 2 more. But in these 3 passages, the only reason I'm throwing them up here is to show you from Scripture, from the text. Let the Bible speak. Let the Bible interpret the Bible. I just want you to see the emphasis that is placed on the home, family, and if we can get back to that, I think that we can survive nicely whatever comes down the pike. I have discovered over the last several years that really the only people you can truly count on is family. Friends can tell you that they're, I love you like a brother, but they don't stick by you. It's going to be family. Now, the church can become that, but I don't think that most of the time we do. I think that what happens is that we are more enamored with association than we are being family. Okay. And so my point in saying survival is that in order to get there, you've got to develop a true level of dynamic of family. And perhaps the best way to do that is for us to get back and emphasizing the family. I've been saying for years that if America is to be restored, 3 things have got to happen. We have got to repent of our de-emphasis on the homemaker, the homeschool, and the home church. If we want to see God's blessing, we got to get back to promoting those kind of things. I got fired from a job because I spent too much time talking about that, but I am absolutely convinced, more convinced today than the day I got fired. I am more convinced today that those are the things that have to happen to show God that we are truly sincere about our repentance. Get back to establishing the homemaker, the home school, and the home church, and I believe God will see that we are willing to go back to the ancient paths, as Jeremiah said, and restart this thing. So if we're going to survive as a church, it's going to be because of family. We just got done talking in the Bible class in Genesis chapter 11 about Abraham, how he's going to leave his area and he's going to travel eventually into the promised land, Canaan. Pedal backwards to Noah. Who gets saved on the big boat? Family. Family has been the core system ever since Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24. And a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. That's family. They come together and family survives. We have got to get back to making the church a family, not a social group. And so in doing that, notice these passages. First of all, here's the passage that I alluded to in the previous slide, and that is that they broke bread in their homes and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Homes was essential right back to the initial moments of the church. They were getting together in their homes. There is no less than 15 individual references to the idea of gathering in homes. Not one reference to owning a church building. Not one. But 15 or more about them having services within their home. So it's wrong to have a church building? No, I never said that. It is definitely wrong to waste God's money on a building that sits empty for the majority of the week. And it's definitely wrong to waste God's money on a building that is going to steal true intimate fellowship if you allow that to happen. But sure, absolutely. You know, if you're going to use it well, we need to be a 5-talent man. And I know a lot of congregations that use their building very, very well. But I also know that the trend in America today is to lose our children to the world. I also know that we're going backwards in attendance and as far as our gathering is concerned. And more importantly than that, we're going backwards in our spiritual maturity. And I think a lot of that could be tied to the fact that we have de-emphasized the family, the home, meeting in home churches. Notice that they're going to come together and they're going to meet in homes, according to the very first snapshot right out the gate of the early church. Then you move to Titus chapter 2, and you notice that Paul is going to emphasize to women, as he gives Titus the instructions, he's going to say, here's some things that need to happen. And by the way, the same emphasis plays out even within the qualifications of the elders that you're going to see that he talks to Timothy about. But notice he's going to say to women, older women, you need to do something. Specifically, you need to urge the younger women to love their husbands. You need to be teachers. Older women need to teach younger women to be familial. That means of the family. Do you see that happening in the church today? My wife has endured a lot of persecution from older women, sadly enough, because she chose to be a homemaker, a full-time career homemaker. And there have been several women, older women in our lifetime who have been very critical of Cindy, almost accusing her of being lazy or without initiative because she didn't get out and pursue her own career. It's just an absolute tragedy what we have done to this particular topic. The rule should be most women stay home and raise their own children. The exception should be that some women are forced outside that role to do other things. But it's upside down in the world today. You know that it is. Most women have a career away from their family, and it's the minority. It's the exception who are actually doing what God said here, and I think that the church is paying a price for it. Notice that older women are to teach younger women to do a lot of things, love the children, etc., self-control, pure, but watch this, and to be busy at what? Home. To be busy at home. Make sure that the home functions. You're going to see here in just a moment, I'm going to say to you that you cannot underemphasize the importance of a homemaker when it comes to the survival of the church. Our first building block is that we've got to establish the family if we're going to survive in these days of persecution with regards to civil disobedience, with regards to the Christian resistance. Family is essential. Now let me take you to 1 Timothy chapter 5 and notice what Paul is going to say about the elders, the shepherds, the leaders of the church, those who set the bar. Forgive me. That's not. Forgive me. This is about widows in the church. This is not the qualifications of elders. You can go to Titus chapter 1 and you can get that. And what is it? 1 Timothy chapter 3, and you can get the qualifications of elders, in which, by the way, he emphasizes that they need to be hospitable. He emphasizes that they need to have an emphasis on their family, etc., etc. But in 1 Timothy 5, forgive me, I'm trying to stay with the woman kind of a theme here. In 1 Timothy 5, we're up against a situation where some widows have no one to take care of them. There's no family members. What are we going to do? Let them starve to death? No, the church needs to take care of them. But how do we address that? And Paul gives Timothy some inspired information as to who's qualified to be supported by the church. Very, very important passage. Who rises to the level that they are qualified to be supported by the church, and what must they bring to the table as proof of their being qualified? Notice what Paul says. No widow may be put on the list of those being supported by the church unless she is over 60. So she can't be a young lady. And she has to have been faithful to her husband. Notice the familial idea here. And is well known for good deeds such as bringing up children. Notice familial again. Faithful to her husband, brings up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet, etc. Read the rest of it for yourself. But that was very important to me. Showing hospitality. If this woman is to be brought into the number, she is supposed to be someone who has established a home, and in that home, established a level of hospitality. Again, these are just three. I could go on for a long, long time talking to you about the emphasis on the home. In fact, I got two more in the next slide. But all I'm wanting you to see is if we're going to survive in this time when more civil disobedience is being called, we are called upon to exercise that. If we're going to survive during this time of Christian resistance, family is essential. We've got to get back to establishing the family. And you can see the emphasis on that within the New Testament. This is not just, as some weak-kneed preachers have said, this is not some kind of cultural glitch. No, this is and this traces all the way back to creation. From the creation story all the way back to Genesis 2:24 or Genesis chapter 3, it has always been the primary role of a woman to take care of the home. That's been the pattern throughout. This is not just some kind of a cultural moment that we can dismiss and say, well, just for that little period of time, women were supposed to be focused on the home. It's been throughout the entire biblical pattern that God has demanded of women to focus on the home. Are there exceptions? Absolutely, but we're not living in that kind of a time anymore. We're living in a time when the exception has become the rule, and we're suffering for it. If we're going to survive, we got to get back to the home. Now, that said, watch these next passages. 1 Corinthians chapter 16 and verse 19. The churches in the province of Asia send you greetings. Aquila and Priscilla greet you warmly in the Lord, and so does the church, watch it, that meets in their house. That's family. This Aquila and Priscilla couple, they are some kind of couple. I can't wait one day to sit down and spend 1,000 years just talking to them and getting all the history and all the stuff. They're amazing folks. We see them repeatedly come up in the New Testament setting. Good friends of Paul, etc. We're going to see another passage here in just a moment with regards to that. But all I want you to see, first of all, is this idea of Aquila and Priscilla. And they are used by Paul as an example of wonderful things happening because they had a house church. They had folks that came into their home regularly. Then as you go to Acts chapter 18, it's going to talk about a fellow who is speaking a half-truth. He began to speak boldly, Apollos that is, in the synagogue. When Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they invited him into their home and explained to him the way of God more accurately. My point is this. The importance of the homemaker cannot be overemphasized in the building of the underground church. It just simply can't be overemphasized. We have got to be people who return to the family. We've got to emphasize the importance of the home, the family, etc. And in so doing, we will prepare ourselves for survival. But when we see, as we do, when we see that the general rule in the church today is for women not to emphasize the home, but to emphasize a career outside the home, we see that this is going to lack. And this important foundational block that goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24, this important foundational block is not going to be very solid. And when it is solid, the rest of the culture will fail. The rest of the culture will falter. The church specifically is going to struggle. Look at America today. And surely you can recognize that if you're going to trace the problem really back to its source, to its real root situation, it's because the family has failed. You know that's true. You know that's true. And so again, I say, if we're going to restore America, we've got to get back to emphasizing the homemaker, the home school, and the home church. Go back to the home. Emphasize the family, and in so doing, we'll prepare ourselves for survival. So, God's plan for survival, as the tanks roll up in front of the cathedrals, we need to go underground. We need to get back to the real pattern of the first century church, and that is that they never did, according to the examples, never did own one of these. But they 15 times or more had home church meetings. Think about that. So next time, part 2 of our survival part of this particular series, and we're going to deal with the fellowship, not just the family, but now we're going to go with the fellowship. Here are the questions that we hopefully have covered. Pray that we have. Please remember the Restoration School of Biblical Studies. And I'm going to make it personal, if you will. Remember my wife. Cindy is absolutely essential to this process. But I tell you what, she just works and works and works. And just last night, we had a little bit of tearful moment where, she's got a lot on her right now. And would you be prayerful for my wife as she grades almost all of the papers that come in with regards to the responses that come into the Restoration School. I sit beside her and do other things, and she reads some of the questions if there's a problem that needs to be a response that I have to make, whatever. But she does a lot of that. She is completely responsible for making sure that all the lessons get up online or sent out, et cetera, et cetera. Please remember my little wife in your prayers more than this. Okay, remember Cindy. Okay. Now, I also appreciate it if you'd support us financially, as many of you do. God bless you. Thank you so much for keeping us alive. But the big one today, just remember Cindy, and that God will give her encouragement. The song, it's just a shorty, but it's a good one. I think most of us have sung this. When I first came across it in the old blue book, I thought, and then, oh yeah. He is able to deliver thee. He is able to deliver thee. Though by sin oppress, God go to him for rest. Our God is able to deliver thee. You sung that, haven't you? What a powerful, powerful concept and thought. I need that, don't you? I need to be delivered from this old world. And God can do that. Come, Lord Jesus. You know what I'm saying? Well, it's been a good drive and adventure with you. I hope that you've enjoyed it. But as we conclude, as we should, it's the Lord's Day. So make sure you take time to spend time with the Lord in communion, remembering the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, the glory that is to come because of the sacrifice your older brother was willing to make for you. Appreciate you. I love you. This is Sonny Chow saying, be there. Matthew 16:26.